Most of us have never had to concern ourselves with how the business of government is properly conducted, but it is not easy. I'm Dan Ringer, and we'll talk about the West Virginia Ethics Commission right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar and the Monongalia County Bar Association.
The ethics of government, it's not an oxymoron. We have a whole state agency dedicated to it. My guests are Theresa M. Kirk, Executive Director of the West Virginia Ethics Commission, and Joan Parker, its General Counsel. Theresa, Joan, thank you for being with us. What is the Ethics Commission?
Well, we are a state agency, and our primary mission is to interpret the West Virginia Ethics Act for the entire state of West Virginia.
Can't just read it and know what it says?
As you know, as a lawyer, it's not as simple as that.
Well, and because actually ethics issues are usually the kinds of things you don't anticipate. Every time somebody does something, they seem to do it in a new way or in a unique twist. I frequently say, and you're probably uncomfortable with this term, I frequently tell people that in a state like West Virginia, with small towns, with relatively rural counties, we are a state of amateur governments. Now that's not a slight at the governments we have in small towns and in counties, any more than the term amateur athlete is a slight at a very good football player or basketball player or soccer player. Amateurs can be very good at what they do, but they're not typically highly trained or highly experienced. So you have a state full of people who need a little help in knowing how to do what they do.
I agree, because public service is a form of volunteerism, and most people have other jobs for a living, and they're not experts in government, and so there are resources there, and the Ethics Commission is a valuable resource to individuals who have decided to serve in government.
Where do the members of the Ethics Commission come from?
Well, Joan can touch on that, but generally from all over the state, because that is how the Ethics Act is written, to make sure that we have representation from all over the state.
Are these professional ethicists? Or
Well, no, they're people. The statute requires that they either serve or have served a certain constituency. We have to have representatives from each area of the state. We have to have representatives from areas of government. We have to have a certain number from each political party. But they are primarily individuals throughout the state, some retired, some professionals, some actively working, who are interested in ethics and open government and have agreed to be appointed by the governor to serve on the Ethics Commission.
So these are gubernatorial appointments?
Correct.
And presumably that brings with it the governor's and the governor's staff experience in knowing who is aware of how things should operate and what kinds of problems have been seen in the past. Now, Theresa, you mentioned the West Virginia Ethics Act.
Right.
That's the body of laws that describe how government is to be conducted.
Yes, that is correct. In 1989, the legislature passed the Ethics Act, and essentially it's the do's and don'ts for those who serve in government. In good government, you have what is right and you have what is wrong. And sometimes when we try to define that, that becomes difficult.
We have a slide that gives a very schematic overview of what the Ethics Act is. The purpose of it is?
To maintain integrity in government through the elimination of conflicts of interest.
And we've had some of those in the past, and the integrity of state governments all over the United States have been questioned from time to time, and we've had some unfortunate circumstances with governmental officials even being convicted of crimes that the Ethics Act is designed to head off, I suppose.
That's correct. I mean, there's not been one government in history which has not had its problems. And all you can do are take steps to establish codes of conduct, so that individuals have rules to follow, and to have individuals who oversee that to ensure that our public officials are living up to what is expected of them under the code.
Or are you the ethics police?
We do have enforcement power. Our primary purpose is that we believe that through education, the majority of people want to do the right thing. But we are tasked that when they choose not to do the right thing, that there are consequences.
But they can come to you and find out what the right thing is.
Absolutely. We spend the majority of our day on the telephone because people want to know what the right thing to do is.
I know I hear stories in the news and anecdotal stories just around wherever I am about odd situations that have come up. We have new members of these bodies, county commissions, town councils, who really don't have an opportunity to be trained or to develop skills in how to do what they do. I want to mention a booklet that is available from the West Virginia Ethics Commission. It's entitled A Guide to the West Virginia Ethics Act, and it's actually fairly lengthy. And you can get it, anybody can get it. It's available at the Ethics Commission website at wvethicscommission.org. That's all one word. You see it there at the bottom of your screen. It's kind of a lot, but you just type in wvethicscommission.org or do an internet search for West Virginia Ethics or West Virginia Ethics Commission, and it's one of the first things that comes up. I printed it out. You can read it online. You can print out your own copy, or if you contact the Ethics Commission, they could probably arrange to send you a copy. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair.
And it gives you an overview of what you as an elected official should and how you should do what you do. And if you're a citizen other than the elected officials, it tells you what to watch out for, what to expect when you're dealing with your local governmental body. There are so many ways to get into trouble, though, being a public official. I want to give you a bit of a scenario and tell me the kinds of issues that are involved here. Let's take somebody who is a good citizen, a concerned citizen in a typical West Virginia town, decides there are some changes that need to be made and runs for city council, and lightning strikes and she gets elected. We're going to assume this is a woman for this purpose. She gets elected because she wants to clean up her town, make it a better place to live, and she owns a business in town. And in fact, she owns a business on Main Street. And her first act, she's promised people she's going to do this. The first thing she wants to do is clean up Main Street. She's getting ready to go to her first city council meeting. What's she going to be concerned about?
Well, one of the first things we would let her know she should be concerned about is that in order to take action, she needs to comply with the Open Meetings Act. So if she called our office, she may speak to Joan or myself, and Joan may tell her, if you want to relate that information.
The West Virginia Ethics Commission interprets and enforces the Ethics Act, as Theresa mentioned earlier. We're also responsible for interpreting the Open Meetings Act. We don't enforce it. And the Open Meetings Act applies to all governing bodies, so here it would apply to the City Council. The Open Meetings Act requires that for a governing body to take official action on anything, that item has to be on the agenda. So our newly elected council member, who's gung-ho to effect immediate change, needs to consult the agenda, and it's unlikely that her pet project will be on the agenda since she just got elected. So we would walk her through to make sure that she doesn't inadvertently violate the Open Meetings Act by making some kind of motion and trying to get some official action taken on a matter that's not properly before the council. Instead, we would suggest that she bring it up to her members, to her fellow members as an item that she is interested in, and that she asks for it to be placed on the agenda for the next meeting, either the next regular meeting or special meeting.
Does the Ethics Act itself have any requirements with regard to how the agenda is prepared or the kinds of things that are on it?
No, that falls squarely under the Open Meetings Act, which once again we interpret. And it's just another means of promoting good government and transparency in government so that business is conducted in the open. So once again, if she called us and we said, you want to effect change, we would state that there's procedures in place that you need to follow in order to comply with other laws.
I know, at least in the past, and I kind of expect it continues to the present, that with regard to school boards, if a school board member wants something on the agenda, they call the superintendent, who is the secretary for the school board and who prepares the agenda. The superintendent puts it on the agenda. Why is it important that it be on the agenda?
Because the whole purpose of the Open Meetings Act is transparency in government. Governing bodies are elected by the people. The people have a right to know what their representatives are doing because it affects their lives. So it's an opportunity for the people to be able to monitor their governing body to see, to ensure that any actions that they take are done in the open.
Well, how would a person know what's on the agenda?
The governing bodies are required to post their notices of their meetings and the agendas in advance of their meetings, and generally that's 3 days in advance of their meetings. And we recommend that those be posted in a public place where the public is likely to see them and encounter them. Now, a lot of governing bodies are now going towards websites. Many have their own websites, although small municipalities don't normally. But we also recommend that you post them on the county courthouse. In some towns, they post it at the post office. So it just depends, but they have to be posted in a way where the public can view the notice and the agenda and have an opportunity to see what's on the agenda. And what's on the agenda has to be specific enough that it makes sense. So you can't have an agenda that says old business, new business, adjourn, because that would defeat the purpose.
Although when you started, that's pretty much what agendas said
In the old days.
in the old days, and
That's true.
you've cured that now.
Well, I'd like to believe that the Open Meetings Act dictates that, in fact, it must be on the agenda. And the reason for that is if a person is sitting at home and they want to determine whether there is a matter of interest occurring at that meeting, then they have the right to know that by looking at the agenda. So it is required.
And it's not sufficient to post it in the bottom file cabinet drawer in the sub-basement of the city hall or county courthouse or wherever it is.
No, that is not adequate. So that councilwoman, by getting the item properly on the agenda, has taken the first proper step. She's put her constituents and the public on notice that she has an interest in improving the downtown area. And undoubtedly, the improvements will require the expenditure of public funds. So from there, we would have other advice for her as well.
How specific does the entry of the item on the agenda have to be? Does she have to say, I want to put 12 flower pots on Main Street, or have the streets swept every 6 hours by somebody or other? Or can it be just a general discussion about Main Street?
Well, if she wants to have a general broad-based discussion about improvements to Main Street with no actual votes taken, then you could have a broad-based agenda item. But let's say that her idea is that step number one is to have the sidewalks paved on Main Street, and she wants that to occur now. Well, that agenda item listing would need to say, consider paving sidewalks on Main Street, including discussion of expenditure in that regard.
She doesn't have to have a sum certain to publish in the agenda. She doesn't have to publish the specifications in the agenda for the sidewalk. It's just we're going to talk about the sidewalk, maybe spend some money on it.
Exactly.
What else does she have to be concerned about now? She's a citizen of the town, so she's got herself elected to the city council. She's on the agenda, but she owns this business on Main Street, and she's not allowed to have a conflict of interest. It sounds like she's got a conflict.
Well, Joan, may I address that?
You keep turning to your lawyer. This is
Yes,
good.
our general
Joan's the general
counsel.
counsel.
Yes.
That's right.
There are two key concerns of the Ethics Act, and we'll take them in turn. And the first one is that public officials may not use their public positions for private gain. So red flags would be going up all over the place if she wanted to pave the sidewalk in front of her business and no other business. So the first thing we would walk through with her, well, how big is this town? How many businesses are on Main Street? Because there is an exception in the Ethics Act that you may benefit, you as a public official may benefit if you're a member of a class of 5 or more. So if there are at least 5 businesses on Main Street, then she won't be accused of using her public office for private gain. But we would also caution that when it comes time to vote, that she, notwithstanding the fact that she is a member of a class, that she disclose so that the public is aware that she has a business on Main Street also.
Does she have to refrain from voting on the issue?
When, I'm drawing a blank here, a member of a class.
No, she does not, because people are elected to office for certain reasons. And in fact, it may have been the merchants on Main Street who supported her because they said, this town needs cleaned up, and you're a business person, and you're the type of person we need leading this drive. So therefore, her constituents put her there in part to help clean up Main Street. And while her business will benefit, it will only benefit as a member of a class of businesses on Main Street. Therefore, it is permissible for her to vote, and she does not have to recuse herself from voting. I think a similar situation may be if you have an attorney in the legislature, and there's legislation coming through which may affect that attorney's practice one way or the other in a broad sense, that attorney is permitted to vote as a member of a class because it's going to affect all similarly situated attorneys throughout the state in an equal manner.
So she could even run for office saying, I'm running for office because Main Street needs to be paved.
Right.
And I know it needs to be paved because every morning when I park in front of my store, I have to park in a pothole.
Right.
And that's okay as long as there are other merchants on Main Street.
Right, that it's just not primarily for her benefit. As Joan stated, that if she decided that she was going to use her office, particularly behind the scenes, to have the portion of the sidewalk paved directly in front of her store, then that would be for her own private gain, and that's not permissible. But if it benefits the entire street, then she can act and she can vote.
But she can't if her business is at the end of the High Street extension and there are no other businesses there and she wants to pave the High Street extension. That would be serving her and really to nobody else's benefit except the people who wanted to come to her.
If the facts were that her business alone would be
Right.
the beneficiary, then that's correct.
So in this hypothetical, her husband owns a contracting company called Main Street Pavers. And he's the only contractor in town, and this is a lucrative contract because they're going to rebuild Main Street. It's in just terrible shape, hasn't been paved since those last idiot council people got unelected. She ran to get it paved. Her husband has the contracting business. He wants to bid on this contract. What's the result?
I hope she calls us first.
Why is that?
Well, under the Ethics Act, one of the main purposes is that it's to prohibit self-dealing. And if you have control over a public contract because you have voice, influence, or power to direct that contract, or you serve on a body that has that power, then you cannot steer those contracts to businesses in which you have an interest, or your spouse has an interest, or dependent children have an interest. So for that reason, pursuant to the Ethics Act, he could not be awarded that contract. There are exceptions to
Go
that
ahead.
rule.
What are the exceptions?
I'll let Joan, she can use an example or talk about one in this situation.
There are 3 exceptions expressly in the statute, and that is if the City Council could demonstrate, would be required to demonstrate to the Ethics Commission that it would suffer an undue hardship, excessive cost, or substantial interference with the operations of government if they were prohibited from using her husband's service. It's a really high standard. You mentioned that he's the only contractor in town who does that. Well, the statute doesn't say that there's an exception so you can keep the business in town to keep the B&O taxes, or to keep it in state because we want to promote West Virginia. So if the city were to demonstrate to the Ethics Commission that it would be cost prohibitive to go elsewhere, that no one else in a 100-mile radius offers this service, or that it would substantially interfere somehow with the operations of government to have to go elsewhere to obtain somebody else's service who doesn't have a conflict. only under those circumstances would the Ethics Commission grant an exemption.
So it sounds as though it might be permissible for the contractor who is married to the councilwoman to bid on the contract, but if he's going to be awarded the contract, there has to be some really good reason that's explained to the Ethics Commission as to why that should be allowed.
Right, and we would hope that she would call us even before any specs are drafted, because we want to make sure that she removes herself from the process even in advance. You don't want somebody to be in a situation who has had the opportunity to draft specs or somehow make it so that her relative has an unfair advantage, that you write the job description or the contract in such a way that her relative is the best qualified as a result.
Sure, and she could say as a requirement to the contract that the paving be done with an Ajax B12 paving machine, and there's only one on the East Coast or something like that, and her husband happens to own it.
Right.
So it sounds as though you're saying that she can come in and she can raise the issue, she can participate in the debate on the issue, but if she has an interest, a pecuniary interest, or is the beneficiary of someone else who has a pecuniary interest in the granting of the contract, she'd best back off at that point and kind of isolate herself from the process from that point forward.
Correct. And assuming that the council members have done the analysis that we talked about to get an exemption, they decide that it is in the city's best interest to contract with her husband's business, then when they go into the session to, they decide they want to seek a formal contract exemption from the Ethics Commission, she must continue to remain out of the picture. It needs to be council's decision, not her decision, as to what constitutes a hardship and whether to request an opinion. So under that scenario, that item would have to be, back to open meetings, that item would have to be listed on the agenda, seek contract exemption from Ethics Commission to contract with, I forget the name of the paving company, XYZ Paving, whatever it is. And then when that agenda item is reached, then our newly elected council member would say, as most of you know, I'm married to my husband's name, who is the owner of this company, therefore I may not participate. And then once she discloses that, and she must disclose that conflict on the record, then she must physically leave the room during council's discussion and deliberation and not return until council has voted on that measure.
You know, in the abstract, this all sounds like it's to a good purpose. It's properly motivated. But as a practical matter, what we have here, it sounds like a rather ponderous process designed to protect the people from the people in some cases. Small towns might have just a half a dozen businesses in the town. The people who are likely to run for city council are the ones who know people, who are successful in the community, and therefore are the business owners. And they get kind of in a bind where they can't do what they know needs to be done because they have an interest in getting it done, and they sort of have to step aside. Or you end up in the situation where the street just collapsed. The city council is getting ready to meet that evening, but you can't address the collapse of the street because it's not on the agenda because it didn't get there 3 days ago.
All but you can.
Right.
How do you do that?
And that is a very good question in an area where there's oftentimes confusion. But that would be under the emergency exception to the Open Meetings Act. And that exception is built in for the situation you described, that if something goes wrong and there are going to be harmful consequences of not addressing it immediately, that in fact you can bring a matter to the meeting or place it on the agenda if in fact it is an emergency. So you would look at, once again, the negative consequences of the street collapse. Are we going to have our water lines affected? Are they going to burst? Those would be valid emergency considerations. So the councilwoman at that meeting that night would state that it has come to my attention walking into this council meeting that we just had a street collapse over on Main Street, and in fact that there has been a water pipe broken. And for that reason I would ask that the mayor call an emergency meeting immediately following this meeting, or add this as an emergency agenda item so that we can address it.
So the provisions are there to do what needs to be done timely, but in general terms, you have to warn the people what these folks on the commission or council are up to so that they can come and be heard. I want to remind you, if you are wanting information about what the Ethics Act provides or what the Ethics Commission can do for you, go to wvethicscommission.org. It's really a handy website. You've got a lot of information there. Download a copy of the Guide to the West Virginia Ethics Act, or the telephone number is there also. Call Joan or Theresa, and they'll help you out. Theresa Kirk, Joan Parker. I almost forgot your last name, Joan. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the Law Works, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. If you want to know if you need a lawyer, you can discuss your problems with a lawyer by calling the West Virginia State Bar Helpline, toll-free, Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 at 1-800-642-3617. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks show topics, information on how to obtain copies of the programs, and additional information about this show's topic. You'll also find a list of legal resources that can help you answer your legal questions. If you'd like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll also find video of this program on thelawworks.org. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The Law Works show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a copy of this program for classroom use, please send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar and the Monongalia County Bar Association.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.